Hello, I'm Annika Chapin. I'm the Director of Artistic Development at Signature Theater, and I'm so thrilled to be here with Donna Migliaccio, who is a wonderful actor and our co-founder and so many things. And we are talking about one of our favorite songs, both of us, I believe. I could speak for you in saying that. Um, okay, well, maybe that's my first question. Is it fair to say that Liaisons from A Little Night Music is one of your favorites?
It is one of my favorites, just because it's such a dense song. There's so much going on in it, and it's also a real challenge to the performer because it's one of those things where the lyric goes past, and if you didn't catch it, you're lost.
Hmm.
I don't know how many people are familiar with the original cast recording with Hermione Gingold, but her accent is so fruitcakey that it's difficult to understand what she was saying. It was years before I understood all the lyrics.
You know, it's so funny that you say that because I've listened to the song hundreds of times, different versions, and it was only in prepping for this conversation that I realized that the line is overstaffed,
Uh-huh.
not overstuffed. I just always thought it was overstuffed,
It
which
has to rhyme with craft. Hermione
yes,
said it was craft and stuffed.
craft and stuffed. Very
Yes.
good. Yes, although I do know I did have a moment when I was looking at the lyrics and thinking, Sondheim, I think there's a tiny rare cheat in this song, which is
Mhm.
that there's that wonderful line about figs and raisins, both of which are in fruitcake. I noticed. So the fact that you said that her accent was fruitcakey, I think is like perfect.
Mhm.
Um, but raisins and liaisons, I'm like, oh, that's like a slight adjacent one,
It's
which still is wonderful.
what's interesting is when I saw the revival with Angela Lansbury, um, she didn't say liaisons, she's saying liaisons, what's happened to them, which is the proper way to pronounce the word.
Mm-hmm.
Got permission from Sondheim to do that. And it's like, sorry, Steve, you put the emphasis on the wrong vowel.
Yes.
Liaisons, what's happened to them?
I mean, it's funny that I feel like it is one of the Sondheim songs that's designed to be devoured in different ways.
Mhm.
I feel like there's so much room for the performer to really just eat it like a meal because
Well,
it's
it's almost a monologue. I mean,
yeah.
and that's what I love about it. Plus, it's such a beautiful counterpoint. It's in the first act, um, and I think it comes right after Desiree and Frederick have gone into the bedroom, and she sort of appears out of nowhere and is disapproving of the entire thing. But it's such a great counterpoint to the 11 o'clock number of the show, which is the Miller's Son, because both of them are talking about using sex for position and security. Um, but it's interesting when you compare the two of them because I get the impression Madame Armfelt never stopped pushing, where
Hmm.
Petra in Miller's Son feels like she's ready to marry the Miller's son.
Hmm.
So
I lost you for just a minute. Did you say she's ready to marry the Miller son?
ready to settle for the Miller's son rather than keep trying to do better, get up to the Prince of Wales.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I'm so glad you brought up the Miller son because I feel like that is something that is not often discussed, which is that I agree with you 100%. I think these two songs are companion pieces in the show. And it's funny because I don't want to name names, but there was a prominent critic at a prominent newspaper who was reviewing a recent production of the show and made a comment about how The Miller's Son was one of Sondheim's rare missteps because it was a song that wasn't necessary to the plot and was given to a minor character.
Right, the 11 o'clock position is
Exactly, exactly. And I said, wow, that's so funny because I think that song is so key to the thematic to the themes of the show, to everything the show is about. And that song and this song, I think, are very much in conversation with each other for the reasons you said. And the idea of this kind of younger woman looking forward at her life where sex is going to be something that she can sort of do sometimes for fun, And then this older woman looking back at her life where sex has been something that she has used to get the security that she has come to have. And it's so much about all in this show that has young people, older people, people who have issues with sex and love, people who have no issues with the pleasure of sex and love. Like there's so many versions of it that to have these two kind of characters encompassing the whole lifespan
Mhm.
of what a woman could be at this time. And then there's class. I mean, it's like it's a master class, I think, these two songs on their own. Anyway, that is all to say I agree with you. Will you tell us a little bit about your personal history with this song? How did you come to know it so well? Have you played
Well,
this part?
I have never played the part, and in fact, I was supposed to do Madame Armfeldt when Signature did the show a few years back. Um, but I was cast to understudy Patti LuPone in the Broadway premiere of War Paint, and when Broadway calls, you kind of have to go. But it broke my heart. I had always wanted to do the role. I've done 3 productions of Night Music, and I've always played Charlotte, but I
Ah,
aged out of Charlotte. And I thought, well, Madame Armfeldt is so much fun. And one of the things that always bugged me about it is so often she just is sort of for dowager. And you don't get a whole sense of her
mm,
other than this, mean mouthed dowager who's always putting everybody down and never has a nice thing to say. And I feel like one of the big misses with Liaisons is you don't get a sense of it just looking at the lyrics, that she was a sensual person.
hmm
She liked sex and was probably really good at it, which is why she went as far as she did. And I feel like there's what often lacks in interpretations of it is a sense of enjoyment of all of these, not just because they gave her position and money, but because she had a good time. Um, but she's sensual, but not sentimental. And that's what is
Yes.
important about her.
Yes, absolutely. And I love that lyric about when emotions I'm going to butcher this lyric, but
Yeah.
when emotions interfere, the nets descend. The
When,
sort of like,
when emotions intervene, the nets descend.
yes.
That whole sequence about it should on no account perplex or worse inspire. It's but a pleasurable means to a measurable end. Why does no one comprehend? It's so, oh, she's just so like, and
I know.
when you look at the progress of the song, and when you couple it also with her monologue where she talks to Frederica at the end of the show about her first love or her first lover, she says not love but lover, who is a count, who gave her the wooden ring, and she threw it
Mm,
because wooden ring, who gives a girl a wooden ring? And then she's like, he may have been the love of my life, but she started with a count, and she goes to a baron, and she goes to a duke, and she ends up with the king. So she worked her way up to get position and property. And
yep.
I have always thought that Desiree is a bastard child of the King of the Belgians.
Ooh, I
Uh,
like that theory.
well, I mean, she says that she basically said, when things got rather touchy, deeded me a duchy. So that's where the chateau is from and all that. And I thought, well, what could make a king start to question, ooh, maybe I need to be careful around this woman. I think that she probably has other things on the king, but because he was a notorious womanizer. It would have been Leopold II,
Mm-hmm.
the Belgians, for a long, long time, including through the action of Night Music, which takes place in Sweden in 1900. So yeah, I that's always been my opinion, that she waited to have a child until it was going to be financially to her advantage to do so.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I love that. I love
Yeah.
that and I think that's completely in keeping
Hmm.
with the character.
I'm so glad
Um,
you agree.
Oh, no, I do. I think that's great. I mean, but I also love that the show sort of, and I'm glad you pointed out the thing that I always find too, which is that I think this is a tricky character for people, for an American audience to wrap their heads around, because I think what we're used to seeing is a sort of like elegant, aristocratic older woman who would never speak of sex, and would be very formal in terms of her rules about marriage and alliances and things like that. And sort of a version of, I always kind of think of Maggie Smith in Downton Abbey, this sort of
Yes.
very like although in the movie they made, I kind of wondered if they had taken some inspiration from this character, because she did end up with quote, a lovely house in France, due to what they sort of shied away was an affair. But and I think what is so wonderful about this character is that she is her relationship with sex, and as you said, like the idea that she is advocating for using these romantic encounters to get what you need as a woman in terms of security, but not emphatically not making it about emotions and love, and also not about like, well, now I have a child who is the king of, like it isn't about the paternity of Desiree, or even like Frederica. I think that comes down to Desiree as well, that it is, as she says, a pleasurable means to a measurable end. And I always love that when you first see Madame Armfeld, she is talking to Frederica and says, when she's going off to, with Frederica into another room, she has a wonderful line about, "I'll tell you about the Baron de Signac."
Sorry,
like,
my printer just started printing.
oh,
It's my husband forgetting that I'm doing this. But it was so, it's a ghost.
Yeah, the printer wants to join the conversation.
Yes.
But yes, I think it's so interesting that when Madame Armfeld is first seen in the first little prologue scene, she is going off with Frederica and says, "Let me tell you about my affair with the Baron de Signac, who was peculiar." She has a wonderful line where you think, "Oh my God, she's talking to this child about
she's telling this little girl all sort of."
I know. Well, to us, I think, it's so interesting that this is a character. These are characters who engage with sexuality in a completely different way than I think we are conditioned to expect from what we imagine that to be. And I also love that you what you said about the placement of this song. It is over a real-time sexual encounter.
Particularly a sexual encounter that isn't going to get her anywhere.
Exactly.
A lawyer, for crying out loud.
Yes.
Anybody that's going to get her out of what I'm certain Madame Armfeld looks at as the of being an actor.
Yes. Yes.
She's not settled. She's having, she lives kind of a scroungy lifestyle. But, I often, I think that probably Leonora spoke to Desiree much as she spoke to Frederica. And I wonder sometimes if Desiree got tired of hearing, "I've got to do it this way all the time," and this is her way of rebelling against her mother.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I feel like, I mean, in the same way that you could say that this and Miller's Son are companion pieces, you could also draw a third part of the triangle to Send in the Clowns a little bit, because in some ways, Send in the Clowns answers what this song teaches, that Madame Armfeld has specifically taught Desiree her ways in the same way she's teaching Frederica. And then Send in the Clowns is so much about Desiree feeling a little bit foolish for allowing emotions to enter her life in a way that
emotions to intervene.
Exactly. And so she has made her life messy in the way that Madame Armfeld couched very much not to, or should I say coached, not couched, coached very much not to do. So this show is so, I mean, gosh, it is wild when you look at these shows, but specifically this one, just how intertwined. I mean, the triangles are everywhere in this show.
It's such a complicated piece, and
a
lot of people think, "Oh, it's easy, it's a sort of light, elegant piece." It's like, no, it's not. No, it's not. And I can tell you, I've been in enough bad productions of it to tell you, people that don't get it really don't get it. And it's one of those. If you compare it against, for example, Sweeney Todd, which has such a powerful book that has so much drive. And this is elegant and somewhat delicate piece. So you can meddle around with Sweeney Todd and do things with Sweeney Todd that you can't really do with night music. It doesn't work to dick around with it too much.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know what you mean. I think it's so intricately crafted that yeah, you don't quite have the flexibility. That's so interesting. I've never heard anyone put it that way, but I see exactly what you mean by that.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
you can change the setting of Sweeney Todd and it still works. But if you try to change the setting of A Little Night Music, it is so much about the Moors of that time and about in a historical sense of that time frame and how you didn't do this and you did do this, and it's just the expectations of what a relationship is going to be. Like I've always found Charlotte and Count Malcolm's, Carl Magnus's relationship so odd because I mean, and I don't think it was out of the ordinary at the time for
mhm.
people to titled men, let's put it that way, to have a wife and then fool around on the side. But he's just so frank about it,
Yeah,
Yep, I'm going to come home and tell you all about it.
yeah,
At least in the movie that the play is based on, Smiles of a Summer Night, it's almost hateful the way the Count puts his wife down. She at least has a little more in the musical. He doesn't humiliate her the way that he does in the movie, the original movie. So yeah, it's just the relationships and so it wouldn't work if you tried to make it contemporary.
yeah. I totally agree. But I also think it's very brilliant at giving you, because I think there are shows that are set in certain times and places where you kind of feel like you have to leave the theater and go home and Google some stuff,
Uh-huh.
or that the program notes, because I've had to write these program notes where you're like, oh, let me give you some info. You're gonna need it for the setting. And I feel like this show is so good at telling you all of the information that you sort of require
Mhm.
about the setting, um, and locates all of these things so specifically in these characters too that um, you do get this wonderful view, like Carl Magnus and Charlotte. And it's funny because I feel like I've seen in that relationship an attempt to emphasize that it's an abusive relationship
Mhm.
that she's, which I think is not in the script, but trying to push, if you take away Carl Magnus's buffoonery a little bit and make him much more sinister, it's the balance all shifts in a
Mhm.
way that it doesn't, then your feelings about Charlotte and her desire to be desired by him, and it just all goes to a different place. So it's so finely crafted that I do think it is all kind of there for you in such a
Mhm.
real way.
Yeah.
um yeah, it's just a magnificent song. And it's funny, I was noticing something about Smiles of a Summer Night, which is that I was watching a clip of the dinner scene when they're all, the famed dinner scene. And what I never knew was that in Liaisons, it starts with that very present harp. You can really feel that harp,
Mhm.
a little kind of, I think it's a mini glissando. But in Smiles of Summer Night, when they're drinking this wine that is full of special love and fertility powers, the soundtrack is this real harp. And I thought, oh, you know what? That's so interesting. I think Sondheim must have borrowed that from that moment in the movie to get that same sense of uh, romance and sort of something almost mystical about
Mhm.
it.
Yeah, and it's
Um,
interesting in Smiles of a Summer Night where she talks about the ingredients of the wine,
mm,
what all went because it's sort of kind of an icky list when you come right
yeah.
all the things that are supposed to have been in the wine to make it have these magical powers. Whereas in Night Music, when she talks about the wine, she says that the secret of its unique power is unknown. And she also claims to have gotten it from the King of the Belgians, who also gave her all the bottles in existence. So it's said to open the eyes of even the blindest among us, but she doesn't
Hmm.
break beyond that.
Yeah. It's just a wonderful thing. So How as an actor do you approach this song? If you have this major sort of monologue number that you are going to be eating deliciously of on stage, how do you begin that process to dive into this
One
song?
of these days I will actually get to perform it. I never have, not in the context of a show. It is not a piece that people go, oh, let me put that in my cabaret. It's just,
I wish they would, honestly.
yeah, it would have to be something small and intimate because it is a long number. So that's the first thing about the numbers you have to acknowledge, that it is long. Um, and the build is slow and very subtle. And there's in the middle of where she's elaborating on these three lovers that she has had, there's this long whine in the middle of it where she talks about, too many people muddle sex with mere desire and blah, blah, nobody does it right anymore, which is such an old person's gripe. Um, so you have to be able to, ding dong, to approach things, figure out a way to make it build and grow. And then it has to come to that place where it closes off at the end and she falls asleep. So she can't get too worked up because otherwise, she would not be able to like conk out at the end as she's supposed to. So it's about finding the pace of it.
Mhm.
It begins as this sort of, you know, here is my daughter doing this thing with this lawyer that isn't going to do her any good. In my day, I feel like that's the preface to it. In my day, at the Villa of the Baron de Signac, where I spent a somewhat intimate year, this is how this works. That I did this, which got me that. And then I did this, which got me that. And you're wasting your time over here because I then did this, which got me all that you see around me. So it's that build, and it's so subtle. And it is because I've heard some people go, oh, that number is such a dirge. It can be a bit of a dirge. So you have to, in performing it, you have to have sort of like an internal energy that you can't express physically. She's just sitting in her wheelchair. Sometimes she gets up and walks around a little bit on a cane, but you're talking to a very elderly person. So it's all these things that she needs to tell you because she's running out of time and she knows it. So she wants to express all these feelings. So it has to have this sort of really contained intensity. I think it's John Caldfleisch. I don't want to misquote him, but he talks about intensity as being a lot of motion in a very small place.
Mm.
It's all there. It's just packed really tight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is, I love that. I love that description of it. Yeah, I was going to ask you about the chair element of it. Do you think if you were performing it, that would be helpful or a hindrance in this case?
Well, we have established that she has difficulty getting around.
Mm-hmm.
Show that there's one place where they're interrupted by guests, by the arrival of all of the guests. They weren't there early. So she has her servant pick her up and carry her off. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that happens and sometimes it doesn't. She doesn't say, pick me up, carry me off. So that doesn't have to happen. But she's in a wheelchair. I think she enjoys being pushed around in a wheelchair. And she might definitely get up and walk around on her own. And I think from a theatrical standpoint, you kind of need to break having somebody sitting in a spot on a wheelchair.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you just visually it'd be a little dull unless you're doing something really interesting with lighting. But it's also she is intruded onto another set, so it isn't like we can, close the grand drape and have her do it in front of the curtain. Everything is a reference back to Desiree and Frederick.
Yeah. And who do you think she's singing to in this moment?
Uh, it's an internal monologue, but I also think she's addressing whoever will listen.
Mm-hmm.
I expect she has probably said this to Desiree in the past, and Desiree
Yeah.
heard it all. So this may be one more attempt to get Desiree's attention. Uh,
Yeah. Probably said it to Frederica too, right? Frederica's like, oh, my grandmother constantly
yeah,
telling me about all her lovers.
And for Frederica, I love the fact that I think is it 14? I'm trying to remember how old she is. I think she's about 14.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
That sounds right.
And she's she's such a steady little girl. Nothing really seems to bother her very much until the end when people start shouting and shooting. But she seems to be, somebody who listens and watches and is learning.
Hmm. Yeah. It's an interesting show that way. I feel like there are many of the characters are wise in many ways, and it's not the ones you would necessarily expect. Like I
Mhm.
feel like the idea of foolishness and wisdom is interestingly spread amongst these different characters, and
Yeah.
Frederica being one of the wiser ones, even though she's also one of the younger ones.
I always
Um,
found it interesting in the movie Smiles of a Summer Night that
mm,
Frederick gets a little boy and he's much younger.
oh,
Relationship had with Frederick happened not too long ago. I
hmm,
think he's like 6 or 7, something like that. Uh, but having it be a girl like on the cusp of womanhood is so much more interesting
it is.
to the show.
It really is. Yeah, that's very interesting. Huh. Good change. Good change, as they say.
Who do we credit for that? Is Hugh Wheeler?
Who? Yeah, it's Hugh Wheeler, the
Hugh Wheeler
book.
can't talk. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, who I've always loved his work with Sondheim.
Yeah.
You have Sweeney, and it's
Just perfection.
delicate touch with all these things.
Yeah. No, they really just wonderful. I mean, Sondheim chose such wonderful collaborators. And so my last question is just there's such wonderful wordplay in the lyrics of this song. There are so many a tiny Titian deeded me a duchy, like
Tiny Titian is one of those that I think goes like right past 95% of the audience. And it's such a great joke too, to say
it is.
Tiny Titian because Titian didn't work small, he worked huge. And I think I don't remember what production it was that had a gigantic Titian in the background for the dining scene. So
Oh, that's
yeah,
wonderful.
I think that's wonderful.
So when you're performing this, are you how much are you giving those particular word plays? Like, how aware do you think Madame Armfeld is of some of those um, clever lines and those wonderful things? Because we know that she's very smart,
Mhm.
but also Sondheim has many clever lyrics, and so I always wonder when you're performing them in character, uh, do you sometimes act as though you are aware and control, like the cleverness is coming from Madame Armfeld, or just are you simply in lyrical world and allowing those lyrics to come forward, if that makes sense?
It does make absolute sense, and I think, again, she is an older person who said this before, and
Mm,
also probably every time she said it, she's polished it up a little more and polished it up a little more. My grandmother used to tell stories, and they got a little bit more elaborate each time she told them. She wasn't lying, she just was adding more frills. I think probably in my idea of what Leonore Armfelt was like as a young woman, I think she was probably a great wit in addition to being a great sexual partner, that she enjoys the put down, she enjoys a well turned phrase. And I think she would probably, um, you know, what once was a rare champagne is now just an amiable hock. That's the whole, and she would pronounce every word,
mm,
but all those. Yeah, I think that she enjoys telling this story. And even though in the dinner scene she is on the cusp of being rude to her guests, I think she's also having fun. And I think she has fun when she tells these stories. She likes to shock. She likes to make people go, "Ooh, what did she just say?" So yeah, I think that she would chew over every word.
mm. Ugh, I love that. I don't. I think this show is so perfect, and I wish there were a spin-off show for every single one of these characters, but especially
Said
Madame
Mother
Armfeld.
Knockfelt's dead at the end.
I know, but that's what a flashback to when she was getting the wooden ring and getting
Yeah,
the tiny Titian.
yeah.
Well, thank you so much for this. This is so wonderful.
Yes, it was so much fun. Thank you for
Oh,
asking.
good. Well, I'm so glad. I love talking about this all the time. So I'm so glad that you could too. And I hope we get to see your Madame Armfeld soon. I
From
mean,
your mouth to God's ears.
I'll talk to Matt Gardner. I'd be happy to do the show every season if I could. So
It is so beautiful. Thank you.
so beautiful.
Okay.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you. And everybody go listen to one of the many recordings of Liaisons from A Little Night Music.